For 70 years, the bell tower of Ashford has stood empty. No rope, no iron, no bell. Yet every midnight, the town still hears it toll, carrying the weight of a broken promise. The town of Ashford was the kind of place maps forgot. Nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, its streets were narrow, its homes weather-worn, and its people bound by traditions older than memory. At the very center stood St. Augustine's Church, a stone relic from the 1800s with ivy creeping up its bell tower. The odd thing was, the bell was gone, removed after a storm shattered it decades ago, and yet, every midnight the sound rang out. It began as a single toll, low and mournful, vibrating through the valley, then another, until the whole town seemed to tremble under its weight. No one could explain it. The church's tower was empty. The bell rope had rotted years ago. Still, the sound carried, reaching into bedrooms, rattling window panes, even stirring the animals in their barns. Some said it was a miracle. Others, a curse. Evelyn Miller had grown up with the sound. As a child, she would hide under her quilt, clutching her rosary beads, and whisper prayers until the tolling stopped. Her grandmother would always say the same words. "It's not ringing for us, child. It's ringing to remind us." But she never said of what. Now, at 26, Evelyn was no longer a girl, but a schoolteacher, returned home to care for her ailing grandmother. On her first night back, she lay awake listening as the first strike echoed through the valley. The sound was heavier than she remembered, like iron dragged across stone. In the morning, over weak tea, Evelyn asked her grandmother, "Why does it still ring if there's no bell?" The old woman's pale eyes clouded with fear. "Because we broke our promise." Evelyn leaned forward. "What promise?" But her grandmother shook her head. "Some things are better left buried." Later that week, Evelyn walked to the churchyard. The stone tower loomed above her, its windows dark holes staring down. Weeds pushed through the cracked pathway, and the air smelled of damp earth. She craned her neck, staring up at the hollow space where the bell should have hung. Empty. Silent. And yet, when midnight came again, the bell tolled. This time, Evelyn stayed at her window, watching the tower. She expected to see villagers, pranksters maybe, hauling chains to create the sound, but the churchyard was empty. And still, the tolls came, each one louder, closer, until she swore she could feel them in her chest. Her grandmother's words haunted her. "We broke our promise." What promise could a town make to a church? To a bell, to God himself, and then forget? The next morning, Evelyn's childhood friend Samuel stopped by. He was older now, broad-shouldered, his face lined from years of farm work. He smiled, but his eyes carried the same unease she felt. "You hear it again last night?" he asked. She nodded. "Samuel, do you know what it means?" His smile faded. "All I know is no one dares talk about it. The last person who did left town and never came back." "Who?" she pressed. He hesitated. "The old priest, Father Dempsey." He tried to silence it. Said it wasn't holy, but a warning. The next week, he was gone. Evelyn felt a shiver crawl down her spine. That night, as the clock struck 12, she stood outside on her porch, facing the tower. The air was thick, almost expectant. The first toll rang, then the second. Her breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she wasn't just hearing the bell. She was feeling it, each strike carrying something deeper. A message, a memory. And as the final toll faded into silence, Evelyn thought she heard something else, a whisper riding on the night air. It said only one word. Promise. Evelyn couldn't sleep. The whisper clung to her mind long after the last toll of the bell faded into silence. She replayed it again and again, the low murmur, almost carried by the wind. A single word that felt less like a sound and more like an accusation. Promise. At dawn, she went to her grandmother's room. The old woman was awake, staring at the ceiling with eyes that seemed older than the house itself. "Grandma," Evelyn said softly, "what was the promise?" Her grandmother turned her head slowly, lips trembling as if she wanted to speak, but feared the weight of her words. "We swore before the Virgin. Swore we would never let the church fall silent. As long as the bell rang, our town would be safe. But," her voice cracked, "we stopped believing. We let the vow rot like the rope on the bell. Evelyn sat frozen. A vow to the Virgin Mary? A vow tied to a bell that no longer existed? Later that day, Evelyn wandered through the town square. She passed the bakery, the general store, the small post office, each place alive with chatter, yet hushed when the topic turned to the midnight ringing. An old man sitting on a bench stopped her. His name was Walter Briggs, one of the last living men who had helped rebuild after the storm that shattered the original bell. "You're Miller's girl," Walter rasped. "You want answers about that bell, don't you?" "Yes," Evelyn admitted. "Why does it still ring? What promise was broken?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "When the famine came, the town prayed. They begged the Virgin Mary for mercy, swore to honor her with a bell that would never fall silent. Said as long as the bell rang, no child would starve again. And for a while, it worked. Crops returned. Rain fell." His eyes clouded. "But when the bell cracked, they took it down. They said faith didn't need iron and rope. They stopped ringing it. They stopped believing. And that's when—" Evelyn trailed off, her throat dry. Walter nodded. "That's when the bell started ringing on its own." That night, Evelyn gathered with Samuel on the edge of the churchyard. She told him what Walter had said. Samuel frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "So what then? The Virgin herself is ringing it? To remind us?" Evelyn glanced at the tower, its hollow mouth gaping against the moonlit sky. "Or to warn us, the midnight hour approached." Together they waited, breath visible in the cool night air. The silence was so deep it pressed against their ears. Then, with the precision of a clock, the first toll rang out. The sound was deeper this time, almost anguished. Evelyn clutched her chest. Samuel cursed under his breath. They stared at the tower, empty but alive with the invisible weight of sound. Then, just as the fourth toll struck, the ground beneath their feet shuddered. A low groan rose from the earth, like timbers bending under strain. Evelyn's eyes darted to the church steps. The stone slabs were shifting. Something was buried there. The tolls continued, each one loosening the stones further until cracks spread across the path like veins of light. Samuel grabbed Evelyn's arm. "We need to get out of here." But Evelyn couldn't move. The air was thick with something more than sound: sorrow, anger, desperation. The whisper came again, louder this time, threading through the tolls. "Promise. Kept promise." Broken. Her knees weakened. "It's not just ringing," she gasped. "It's calling." By morning, the church steps looked untouched, as if the night's tremor had never happened. Yet Evelyn couldn't unsee it. The cracks, the shifting stones, the way the earth had seemed to breathe under the bell's toll. She paced her grandmother's kitchen, the floorboards creaking under her restless steps. "Something is buried there," she muttered. "Something tied to the vow." Her grandmother sipped her tea with trembling hands. "Let it rest, Evelyn. The bell tolls to remind us, not to be unearthed." "But what if it's more than a reminder?" Evelyn pressed. "What if it's a warning?" The old woman's eyes hardened. "Then we must endure it. Some promises, once broken, cannot be mended." That answer didn't sit right with Evelyn. Later that day, she returned to the church with Samuel. They carried lanterns, though daylight still lingered, and the air was heavy with an uneasy silence. "Look," Samuel said, pointing at the steps. The cracks were faint now, but still there, spider-webbing across the stone. "You weren't imagining things." Evelyn crouched, tracing one of the lines with her finger. The stone was cold, colder than it should have been under the sun. A chill traveled up her arm. She pulled back sharply. That night, as the clock crept toward midnight, Evelyn and Samuel returned again, their lanterns flickering in the wind. They weren't alone this time. A few townsfolk had gathered quietly in the shadows, drawn by curiosity or fear. No one spoke, but all eyes were fixed on the tower. The bell tolled. The first strike rolled through the valley, then the second, the third. With each toll, the cracks widened, dust trickling loose. On the fifth toll, a stone slab shifted audibly. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Evelyn's heart pounded. She stepped closer, lantern raised. As the seventh toll echoed, the slab slid an inch, revealing darkness beneath. A sound rose from the gap. Not the toll of a bell, but something softer, more chilling. Whispers. Dozens of voices, layered and broken, rising like breath from the grave. Evelyn staggered back, covering her ears, but the whispers pressed into her mind. Promise, forgotten. Promise, broken. Samuel grabbed her arm, pulling her away. Evelyn, we shouldn't be here. The townsfolk scattered, fear etched on their faces, but Evelyn stood rooted. Through the whispers, she heard one voice clearer than the rest. A woman's, soft yet commanding. Restore what you took. The final toll rang. Louder than any before, shaking the earth beneath their feet. Then silence. The crack sealed, the slab sliding back into place as if nothing had happened. The crowd fled, muttering prayers and curses. Samuel pulled Evelyn along, his face pale. We can't go back there. But Evelyn knew better. The bell wasn't done. The vow wasn't just broken. It was demanding to be remembered, and unless they uncovered the truth, the town would pay the price. The next day dawned gray and restless, clouds hanging low as if the heavens themselves bore witness to Ashford's secret. Evelyn could hardly eat, her stomach knotted with the memory of the voices that rose from beneath the church steps. She spent the morning in the library attached to the schoolhouse where she taught. Dusty records, parish notes, faded newspapers, she pored over them all. At last, tucked between brittle pages of an old parish ledger, she found it, a vow. It was written in faded ink, dated more than a century ago. We, the people of Ashford, promise before the Blessed Virgin Mary that as long as this bell tolls, we will keep her memory alive, and no child of this town shall starve again. Should we forsake this vow, may the bell toll without ceasing, a reminder of our sin. Evelyn's hands trembled. The words weren't a metaphor, they were a pact, one the town had broken. That evening, she showed Samuel the discovery. He rubbed his jaw, uneasy. So what do we do? Build another bell? It's not just about the bell, Evelyn said. It's about the promise. They vowed to the Virgin Mary herself. They swore their faith, then abandoned it. Samuel frowned. Faith doesn't feed crops. People lost hope, that's all. Evelyn shook her head. No, Samuel. Faith carried them once. Maybe it can again. As midnight neared, Evelyn returned to the church, ledger clutched in her hands. Samuel followed reluctantly. The churchyard was empty, townsfolk too frightened to return after the previous night. The tower loomed silent, shadows stretching long. When the first toll rang, Evelyn stepped onto the church steps. The cracks splintered wider beneath her feet. Samuel shouted, but she stood firm, raising the ledger high. We remember, she cried into the night. We remember the vow you made. We remember the promise. The bell struck again, louder, rattling her bones. The wind whipped, carrying faint whispers. Samuel gripped her arm, trying to pull her back, but she shook him off. She pressed her hand against the stone slab. Cold seeped into her palm. The whispers surged, no longer faint but insistent. Promise, broken. Promise, restore. Evelyn's vision blurred, and in the wavering light she thought she saw figures, pale, gaunt, the shapes of children standing behind the church windows, eyes hollow but pleading. Her breath caught. The eighth toll crashed, and the ground shook violently. Samuel pulled her back as the slab shifted open once more. The whispers poured out like a flood. Evelyn dropped to her knees, clutching the ledger to her chest. I will keep the vow, she whispered. I swear it, before the Virgin and before heaven. The promise will be restored. At that, the final toll rang, deep, resonant, shaking the valley with a sound that felt less like doom and more like release. The whispers stopped, the air stilled, and the slab slid shut. For the first time in decades, silence fell over Ashford at midnight, but Evelyn knew this was not an ending. It was a warning, and perhaps a chance, one that demanded more than words on paper. The vow had been remembered, but now it had to be lived. The silence that followed that midnight was almost unbearable. For years, the people of Ashford had lived with the tolling, cursing it, fearing it, but growing accustomed to its certainty. Now, with the bell finally quiet, the absence felt louder than its sound. Evelyn lay awake, her heart pounding. Had her vow been enough? Or had she simply delayed whatever judgment loomed over the town? By morning, whispers had spread like wildfire. Shopkeepers and farmers, mothers and children, everyone noticed the stillness. Some celebrated, calling it a blessing. Others feared it meant something worse. When Evelyn walked through the square with Samuel, people stopped her. "Did you go to the church last night?" they asked. "Did you hear it stop?" She answered with silence, unsure what to say. That evening, she returned alone to the church. She couldn't rest until she knew the truth. Lantern in hand, she climbed the worn steps. The cracks were still visible, though faint, like scars healing over. She laid the ledger down on the altar inside, whispering, "The promise will be kept. I swear it." The wind rose, carrying with it a faint hum. For a moment, she thought it was the bell again. Her chest tightened, but then she realized it wasn't coming from above. It was beneath her feet. The stone slab shifted once more, slower this time, revealing not just darkness, but something gleaming below. Evelyn knelt, lantern trembling in her grip. At the bottom of the hollow lay the shattered pieces of the original bell, broken but glowing faintly with a golden light. Carved into its surface were words she had never seen before. "Faith endures where iron falls." Tears blurred her vision. The vow had never been about the bell itself. It was about the faith it represented. "Grandma was right," she whispered. "We forgot." She reached out, brushing the fragments with her fingers. The glow brightened, and for a fleeting moment she heard children's laughter, free, unburdened, alive. Then the light dimmed, and the slab sealed shut once more. The next midnight came, and for the first time in 70 years, there was no toll. Only silence, a silence that felt like mercy. When Evelyn told her grandmother, the old woman smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You reminded them," she said. "You kept the vow." That Sunday, Evelyn stood before the congregation at St. Augustine's. With Samuel at her side, she spoke not of fear, but of hope. She told them of the promise their ancestors had made and how they had the power to keep it, not with iron and rope, but with faith, kindness, and unity. The town listened. For the first time in years, truly listened. And though no bell tolled that night, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of promise, of remembrance, of grace. Evelyn knew the bell might one day return if they forgot again. But for now, the vow was alive, carried in their hearts, and in the stillness, Ashford finally slept in peace. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a whisper of grace today.